Honorable guests,
جلستنا الثانية
our second session for today in Knowledge Opera entitled Education Accelerators Sustainable Solutions. And in this session, we have Hassan Damlaji, Deputy Director, Global Policy and Advocacy, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. We have Ralph Taber, owner and Chairman of BBD Education, as well as Dima Najm, Managing Director, Education for Employment. Our moderator is Dr. Ali Ahmed Al-Ghafli, Vice Dean for School Sciences at the College of the Humanities and Social Sciences, UAE University. Again, the title of the session is Education Accelerators Sustainable Solutions.
أدعو الآن السيد
I'd like to invite Dr. Ali Al-Ghafli to join us on the stage to moderate our session, Education Accelerators Sustainable Solutions. Our speakers are kindly invited to join him on the stage.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. السلام عليكم. For choosing to attend this session, and I'm extremely happy to be here. In fact, there is no place I would like to be at in this morning, at this time, other than this place, in the company of our esteemed speakers. In this second session of the second day of the Knowledge Summit. It gives me great pleasure to introduce to you the speakers in this session. On the far left side of me is Ralph Taber. Ralph Taber has 40 years of experience in schools, research, teacher training and policy, and he was a director or the Director General of Schools in England between 2006 and 2009, and after serving 6 years as Chief Executive of the Teacher Training Agency. Ralph is a graduate of Cambridge University. He is a visiting professor at the Institute of Education, University of College of London, and an honorary professor at Warwick University. And he was included in the 2009 New Year Honors List. Thank you, Ralph, for joining us. With us also, Dima Najm. Dima Najm has a significant professional experience in women and youth empowerment, financial inclusion, partnership management, fundraising, and operations management of NGOs. And she has a working experience of over 15 years in senior NGO roles in the MENA region. Dima Najm assumed the role of Managing Director of Education for Employment, EFE, UAE, under the leadership, under her leadership. The EFE UAE has built partnerships to catalyze youth employment through EFE affiliates across the region. Thank you, Dima, for being with us.
Thank you.
Last but certainly by no means least, sitting to my immediate left side is Hassan Damlaji. Hassan is the lead advisor to Bill and Melinda Gates on the Middle East and North Africa, Pakistan, Japan, and Korea. He manages a global team responsible for the foundation's work in those countries. He is a co-founder and board member of the Lives and Livelihoods Fund. Hassan has written extremely about global development and politics, and his first book, The Responsible Globalist, was published by Penguin Penguin Allen Lane in 2009. Congratulations, Hassan, for this accomplishment. Okay, thank you all for joining us. And in terms of, or as an attempt to frame this session, let me begin by sharing with you these thoughts. Education commands a significant importance at every single level. Philosophers have emphasized the importance of education. Names like John Locke, Mary Wollstonecraft, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, just to name a few, have spoken or have written intensively about the importance of education, not only for creating the opportunity for people to get jobs and careers, but also to build the character, and that is a very important thing. Families as well. Every single family aspires for the best type of education for its kids. Governments care about education, and we can see this expressed in terms of the governmental priority that we can measure by looking at how much economic resources the government allocate to education from among all other areas of public policy performance. Societies do that as well. There is this concept of societal effort that we can gauge by looking at how much the society at large spends on education as a percentage of the gross domestic product. Therefore, education is very important, and it is wise for us to dedicate this session to education. But at the same time, unfortunately, our modern world suffers from a number of resilient, intractable, difficult global issues or global challenges. We can talk about the climate change, poverty, pollution, global warming, and security issues. So on one hand, we have this emphasis placed on education, but on the other hand, we have this annoying difficulty of global challenges. Therefore, I commend the decision of the organizers of this conference to dedicate this session to see in what ways education and addressing global challenges can be worked out. Education is important, but let's ask ourselves, what type of education? Education that is boring, at least from the perspective of students, education that does not qualify people for proper jobs, education that produces people or students who are indifferent to universalistic global issues is not a good education. We don't want that. Education that cares about preparing people for jobs and careers is a good education, but that might not be enough. What we should care about is excellent education, education that awakens the souls of the people, of students, learners, education involved in this process, education that makes people be careful when addressing the global challenges, the topic of our session here. This might be a long bridge to cross. I mean, seeing how education can contribute to addressing global challenges. And I personally do not have much by way of personal wisdom to do the task here. What I have instead is an excellent assembly of great minds, okay, who will help us explore this relationship between education on one hand and the task of addressing global challenges. The first who will share his thoughts with us today is Hassan Damaluji. We ask you, Hassan, to share with us your thoughts with regard the virtue of offering education that is inclusive, education that is relevant and equitable to people around the world. Explore that, please, for us in terms of the virtue of this mission, as well as, if possible, the actual practice, the situation. Is it really happening?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Thank you so much, Professor Ali, and to the organizers for inviting us, myself, and putting on this session. It's great to be here. In 2015, I had the honor of receiving, on behalf of Melinda Gates, the Knowledge Award. And so ever since then, this conference has had a special place, not just for me as a person who leads on this region, but for Melinda Gates as well, and for our foundation, because of the honor that she received by His Highness a few years ago. I also just want to call out that we have a lot in common across the panel. I sit on the board of the Education for Employment Foundation Europe board, and Dima, of course, leads the UAE chapter. And Ralph and I have many friends in common from work we've both done in education, both in the UK, in Saudi Arabia, and other countries. So I hope there's a really good conversation, and I don't want to spend too long with initial thoughts, but I did want to set out a few topics that we can then dig deeper into. I should also remind you to thank Ralph and I for bringing the rain from the UK, because we certainly had enough of it to share before we got on the plane. And it's nice to hear that sound as we're talking.
Very pleasant, yeah.
Yesterday, I was in Abu Dhabi alongside Bill Gates and a huge contingent from our foundation, as well as donors from all over the world, where $2.6 billion was pledged, around 40% of it from our foundation, but 25 donors, private and countries, including a huge contribution of $160 million by Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed to global polio eradication. And that is money that we know will go towards vaccinating kids. And every time a child is vaccinated, they're protected for life from a disease which certainly, if they get it, will lead to them being paralyzed. In 1988, there were 350,000 cases of polio, and because of the efforts of donors, including the UAE, we now have reduced that by 99.9%, so that there are less than 100 cases a year now. So why am I telling you that? I'm telling you that because we don't have the same story for education. I can't tell you that if you give me $2.6 billion, I can go and reduce an educational problem by 99.9%, or increase an educational benefit by 99.9%. And when we were talking in the green room, Ralph challenged me to say, what would be I said, let's not talk for too long. He said, okay, what's the one thing you would say? So I said, okay, if you were to ask me one sentence that I only had to say, I would say, we haven't figured it out yet with regards to education. And I think if there's one key takeaway, that is what I would say. Professor Ali asked me to focus on the idea of equitable quality education for all. And I think that's appropriate in the sense that we as a foundation focus on people in absolute poverty, who both educationally, but also in every other part of life, are the people who don't have equitable access to almost anything, whether it's food or health or jobs and so on. So in education too, if you want equitable access, you need to focus on the poorest people, and that's what we try and do. But it's precisely because of the fact that there is no known, measurable, globally applicable formula for taking a big pot of money, which is basically what our foundation is, and turning it into progress in education. We've spent much more time over the last 20 years since we were founded focusing on health. But education is such an important issue that actually just over the last 2 years, we have started a global education program at the Gates Foundation, which is designed exactly to build on the realization that we haven't figured it out yet. So what are we trying to do to figure it out? The first thing, and I'm really glad that quality education was mentioned in your question to me. The first thing to note is that the world has made amazing progress on getting what we call in the UK bums on seats and getting kids in school. So if you go back to the 1970s, countries like China, Nigeria, the Philippines had a minority of their kids in school, a minority of people ever having gone to school. That's changed. You know, well over 90% of kids who should be in primary school are in primary school. The problem is, according to UNESCO, 617 million children and adolescents worldwide are unable to read a single sentence. So what is all that money going to? We haven't figured it out, but we know that money isn't what fixes it. one of the exercises we've been doing concurrently is to try and figure out, so that we can advocate to countries, what's the minimum you have to spend to get a good health system, a decent health system. Turns out it's about $140 if you're a poor country per person. Rwanda spends about $140 per person, and they get 80% of the health outcomes of Japan. Others spend double or triple, and they get 40%, 20% of the health outcomes. But we know that if you spend $140 per person, you can get to decent health outcomes even if you're a poor country. There isn't a number like that for education. When you look at the map, there's almost no number that's too low, because some countries are actually producing decent education on a shoestring. Unlike medicine, you don't need to buy a drug. You could have a smart teacher sitting under a tree teaching kids. And yet, there are countries that spend billions and billions and billions and get nowhere. So money is not enough. One thing that we do know, though, is that one of the main problems with the education system in rich countries and poor is that the system, and Bill Gates said this to me yesterday, reminded me that this is his view, is that the system is run for the adults and not the kids. In every country, from the US to countries in sub-Saharan Africa, teachers are a very powerful and educated and politically active group of people. And they should have their voice heard, as are parents. But the point of the education system is the kids, and they're the ones with the least voice in it. So one thing that we know we have to somehow do is make sure that they are the people we're optimizing for. So what are we doing? We have three different areas that we're investing in when it comes to global education. One is about global action, because some things need to be coordinated globally. And the biggest problem we have is even figuring out who's doing well and who's doing badly. PISA is a great internationally comparable ranking for kids' education. It's run by the OECD, but it's only a certain subset of countries that enter those tests. Then you have something called TIMSS, which is another one. Then you have different national and regional assessments. And the end of it is to say, if this country is doing well in ranking X, it is not possible to compare that on a global level to other countries, and you end up with effectively meaningless data. So we're working with UNESCO and other partners to try and create globally comparable indicators of how much kids are learning in different countries. And alongside that, an education policy dashboard that tells you some of the double click on why. We're also working with the World Bank in what they call their Human Capital Project to define the education part of what they call the Human Capital Index, which basically tells you how much countries are succeeding in their attempt to raise human capital across health and other areas. But it's not only about the global system. Every country has a very unique situation with regards to education. So we're working in countries to develop systems diagnostic and decision support to help identify specific challenges that countries have as frankly, a management tool for governments. And then the final area is classroom practice, because at the end of the day, what happens in the classroom is what determines whether the kid learns or not. And we know that the quality of teachers and how you hire them and who they end up being is the most important part of that. But what a quality teacher ends up being is what happens in the classroom. It's the classroom practice that determines whether that teacher has good quality or not. So we have both a non-tech and a tech approach to that. In other words, what are some of and a great example in healthcare that, again, where you know that lives are saved, is something as simple as if a mother, after the baby is born, holds the baby to their skin in the early minutes and hours after they're born, the chance of the child dying goes down by 80%. Now, we don't know what the classroom practice is that makes the chance of learning go up by 80%, but we're trying to figure it out. What are the basic things that you don't need an iPad to do? And then the other one is education technology. Not by picking this or that, because there's a market out there, there's so many apps being developed, but to try and identify and curate those that are the best, to try and create a system that actually pulls out what's working in this very crowded but as yet unproven market for education technology. So those are the baby steps we're taking in order to try and get to an answer to the overall point that I have, unfortunately, to share at this stage in 2019, which is we haven't figured it out yet. So we're trying to figure it out. And maybe I'll just pause for there and we can keep the conversation going. Thank you.
Hassan, you're, part of the reason you haven't figured it out is because of those questions. 2 or 3 of them are the wrong question. You're not going to find an answer to those questions. So let's explore this. We'll have the sessions and we'll get into the grit.
That. Yeah, we'll explore that. Thank you, Hassan, for sharing with us this informed sketch of the performance of the provision of education at worldwide level, and we regret that not similar success is made in education as compared with the health sector. And this introduces this idea of this comparison that you have alluded at, introduces the idea of how different global challenges interact with each other. I can imagine an individual in a third world country receiving good education, but still maybe not counted as part of the human capital of his own nation because of brain drain. At a certain stage, that educated individual who has received good education might be a victim of another global issue, which is brain drain, deciding at a certain stage of his or her life to fly to another country and then become an addition to the human capital of that recipient country. So we will explore this as well. Dima, there is a lot of expectation of education institutions. Much of what we expect with regard of the contribution of education in terms of accelerating efforts to deal or to address global issues depend on how educational institutions are actually performing. Please give us your informed description of the situation.
Sure, absolutely. First of all, thank you very much for the nice introduction. It's for me, it's always an honor to be here on such a stage. I really would like to thank Mohammed bin Rashid Foundation, Knowledge Foundation, for their efforts in bridging the gap. This is what we always, try to advocate. Let's bridge the gap. Whatever that gap is, needs to be first identified. So we need the likes of Hassan actually to give us the data, the science, the number. What is the problem? And then we need to address the problem. Personally, I am a second-generation refugee, a Palestinian refugee. And then later on, after we built our lives, we were forced again and we were displaced. In the past 10 years, I've lived in 4 countries, not only one. Eventually, ended up in the UAE, which was a blessing, to be honest, because this is one of the countries in the region where someone actually like me can build their life again from scratch. So why am I telling this story? Because the only thing that my grandparents, my parents, and then me and my children actually were able to take from our homes when we left was the knowledge, the skills. This is the thing that enabled us from building everything from scratch. One of the most important challenges and what we call them goals right now is, first of all, the quality education. Secondly, the unemployment. And the unemployment is a very important issue to tackle, and it's linked directly to the education system, and it's linked directly to our expectations from universities, from schools, and the type of youth that we would like them to graduate that corresponds to the needs in the job market. So the issue that we have here, and I'd like to focus again on the MENA region and link it actually to globally how the MENA region actually helps in stabilizing the whole globe, not only in the MENA region, because we have a lot of conflicts, a lot of things that are happening in the region, and some of that actually linked directly to the unemployment rate. So we have in 2015 we had 80 million youth in the MENA region, because we we are actually a young nation. 2030, we will have 20 million youth added to that. Out of those, around 28% are unemployed. And this is 2 times the global average. So we're talking about the highest unemployment rate in the world here in the Middle East and North Africa. Why is that? Because we don't really have youth graduating with the enough skills, the needed skills for the job market. And this is the one thing that we would like to focus on tackling. And with Education for Employment, us being a non-profit that is advocating and talking to policymakers, to universities, working directly with youth, trying to deliver the message from youth who are sitting at home, frustrated, not making enough contribution to their families, not making enough money to be able to be productive, and then think about the global challenges. How do we expect a young person from this region to sit and think about global warming, where this person actually is trying to find a job, sitting 3-4 years at home, not being able to contribute to the society? So for me, what I'm suggesting today is that we need to prioritize. And one of the things is looking at our education system, look at the science. We have the science, we have the numbers. The numbers are telling us that we're not being able to bridge the gap. So why is that? We need to ask the question. Is it because we're still in an educational system that is built on the industrial age values? Is it because we are teaching our kids values and skills that is not this century skills? Maybe, and that's the question that we need to ask and answer. And it's not really a future problem. It is today's problem, because what we are doing today is going to affect us in the future. So if we looked at the educational system, we look at the way that we deal with kids. We look at the values of the industrial age, which is the mass production and mass control. Every kid is expected to do what they are told at exactly the time that they are told to do it, and produce the results that we want. And then they'll be evaluated based on that exactly. And these are not the values of the 21st century. We're looking for what are successful people in this century. Who are they? They are the creative ones. They are the ones who actually can communicate their ideas, the ones that can collaborate and work with others, and the ones that are going to find solutions for the global challenges. How are we going to address the challenges of the future? By preparing the kids of today for the future. And this is what we are trying to advocate. This is what we are trying to raise the awareness about, and we actually collaborate with a lot of educational institutions who are doing a lot of great things, especially here, for example, in the UAE. We can see that a lot of the universities are offering, for example, employability skills, offering a lot of programs for their students. The one thing that probably is still a barrier is that this is extra. This is something that students should do, and it's not part of their, the grades. You're not going to get extra grades for example, going to a session that is Joanna from Education for Employment has spent a week preparing. So at the end of the day, we end up in a room that is empty. Youth will not come unless there is incentives. And the incentive for them in some of the educational institutions is that passing the standardized tests. So how are we going to prepare them if we don't really link acquiring these skills to the way that we eventually end up, judging their performance? It should be part of the educational system. We should actually reward them for doing that work. We should have skills as part of the curriculum that we teach. It shouldn't be extra. So as Education for Employment, I don't know, we had a presentation actually, and I wanted to show a movie as part of the presentation. And yeah, so why am I trying to do that? I am probably an angry Middle Eastern young woman. Yeah. So actually, if we can go to the last slide. we actually went through all of that, and we're not going to go through the numbers and the science again. But I wanted to take you actually to the last slide of this presentation. Oh. For example, this is one of the young people that we teach. This is a young man that is part of 27% of youth that are unemployed in the Middle East and North Africa. And all he wants to do, he wants to find job. He wants to find the dignity of work. And to add to that issue, we have the lowest participation rate among the female youth in our labor market. So why is that? This is something that requires us to work on the mentality. To add to the problem also, we have the issue of refugees. So so bear with me while I reach to the final one. So what I wanted to do today, actually, I wanted to communicate the voice of our youth. I wanted one of our graduates, which we are proud to say that this is the 100,000 graduate that graduated from Morocco last month. And this lady will tell us her story, what actually was her education and how that education enabled her or didn't enable her from finding a decent job and being part of the working power in Morocco. Can you say? No?
Okay.
Video ما يشتغل.
Video?
Yeah, I don't know how, to be honest.
Can they play the video? Yeah, it's in the presentation.
So that's fine. I wanted to end my note with Zainab. Zainab, she is a young Moroccan woman who graduated with a degree in finance, and then she did her master's, and she spent 3 years after that looking for a job and couldn't find it, then ended up working with or registered for technical education in coding and programming. And then that enabled her from finding a job because that was actually a technical skill in addition, of course, to the soft skills that enabled Zainab from eventually being employed. So this is the message that I wanted to share through the video.
Thank you, Dima, for these insightful thoughts, and thank you for emphasizing or reminding us that for people whose concern number one is finding a job, these people might not be immediately expected to care about how to address global challenges, which gets us back to what universities or what the educational institutions should be doing. On their agenda, there might appear many items. One of them is to qualify people or graduates of educational system to join the market forces with the appropriate skills. On the other hand, these institutions are expected also to invest in creating the warmth or the compassionate character of the people from which these students graduate, as well as contributing to assisting governments how to further the economic welfare of the society. So they do not only produce graduates not knowing about whether the economy is growing enough or properly in order to accommodate the graduates. So this reminds us of the obligations of educational institutions and how to recalibrate these items in order to best help institutions and societies confront the global challenges. Ralph, you have enough experience and wonderful experience to tell us about the empirical side of this whole thing. I mean, it will always boil down to academic administrators and institutions in order to listen to all of the concerns, listen about or learn about what expectations the society places on institutions, and to sit on the drawing board, design curriculum, a program in order to reflect all of these expectations in terms of capturing that part from the discipline, academic discipline, reflecting it into an academic program, offer students with courses. So it's a very deliberate process, and nothing is left for chances. Please share with us your thoughts about how to design curriculum and how to design courses and academic programs that would help universities or educational institutions to address global challenges at hand.
Thank you very much, Ali. You've actually reminded me that I may have one time been the problem. What I mean by that is I've spent a lot of my life working with governments and with schools defining curriculum, and you asked me to focus on curriculum in this session. And I remember somebody talking to me 10 years ago when I was in the UK, in charge of the ministry, in charge of the national curriculum of England, in charge of 25,000 schools, in charge of 32 billion pound a year budget of what's spent in those schools. And somebody had said, well, why did you come into this business, Ralph? And I said, well, 10 years ago I was watching government and I was wondering, why did it make so many bad decisions? And I wanted to go in and work with government so I could find out why it made so many bad decisions. And after 10 years of working in government, not only did I know why it made so many bad decisions, I realized I could do it just as badly as they could. Now, I think the education is deeply contextual and cultural. I've been living and working in the region now for 11 years only, and I've learned that as someone trying to create curricula, I spend half my life building things up and the other half disrupting. You need to do both. Now, the answer to your question, Hassan, about what have we learned, the one thing I've learned is there is no global answer to education. It's always about trying to understand the community you're working with and how you make their education sustainable for their community, how it helps them to continue what they are, that identity and heritage, as well as to embrace the world and the new. So part of the reason we don't find the answer is because I think it's always being customized to different places. You know this, you do this really well. But this challenge of writing a curriculum for the past, the present and the future is an enormously difficult challenge. There's a wonderful satirical piece which was written in 1939 by a European called Pennywell, where he talked about the curriculum of the age, the Paleolithic age. So go back 100,000 years to the start of Homo sapiens, go back maybe 50,000 years before the massive ice age, and you find that actually the curriculum that man was teaching, so this Pennywell says, was what was called the Sabre-Tooth Curriculum. It was, you were taught as a hunter and gatherer how to grab fish with your hands. That was the first part of the curriculum, because that would feed you. You were taught how to club woolly horses in order to feed the group, and you were taught how to frighten off saber-toothed tigers with fire. So that was the curriculum. The Ice Age came along. Unfortunately, the water got frozen and the fish were harder to reach with your bare hands. The woolly horses gave way to agile antelopes, and the saber-toothed tigers died out with pneumonia from the damp air, and they were replaced by scary bears. They were still teaching the old curriculum. Didn't help. You ended up with a lot of dead people. The fire doesn't scare a bear, it attracts it because it lives in the forest. So we got the wrong curriculum for the age. Now, this is typical of curriculum. We're not very good even at linking together the past and the present, let alone the future. Let alone a future which is moving so fast and is so profoundly interconnected as we've got now. Now, the only thing I would say is, as we embrace this challenge, I think the binding idea always for me is that deep education is always about a conversation between generations. It's always about a conversation with our forebearers, and that conversation holds at its center actually what sustains us. It gives us our language. It gives us our heritage. It gives us our culture. If I want to sustain a community, then I want it to have a family location, a sense of identity, a sense of faith. These are powerful forces, a sense of family. So it's really important that we teach people about the past. We also teach people about this great journey of understanding the arts, or understanding history, or building science generation on generation. We have to teach that. We mustn't remove that, because the idea that we're international citizens but not actually individually with our own identity is crazy. You talk about coming from your identity and your background to who you are. You locate so much of your knowledge in that refugee past as well as in where you are now. These are powerful aspects of it. We must respect that. We must give everybody access to that. And at the same time, we must deal with the present. One of the great challenges in the world at the moment isn't artificial intelligence, it's artificial facts. So we've got to get children to engage with what's real, what's fake, to recognize it. And now that it's got photographs which are faked of not real people, videos that are faked, it's just dealing with the present and the past. We've got to teach children about this future. Now, as we put this together, the one thing we've learned about curriculum is it's a mistake to think that it will be done by institutions. It's actually done by the students themselves, and it's done by their parents, and it's done by the institutional impact. So as we change our curriculum, we have to make sure that the home changes, as well as the school and the college. At the moment, I spend a lot of time when I'm working with colleagues here in the UAE on the future of education here. I'm working in Saudi, I'm working in Bahrain, and we talk a lot about the family and what it does at home. One of the great strengths of the region is family depth and interaction, much stronger than in my country in Northern Europe. How do we use that in a way which gives children the right future? And actually, it's very often by creating a mind frame. Very good report recently from your old friends in McKinsey, Hassan, about mind frame actually being more important in determining children's futures than socioeconomic background. How do we create that mind frame? Well, actually, you create it by every evening, if you're at home eating with your children and talking about what you've done all day, then they're getting a mind frame that learning is important. This is what I learned today. What did you learn today? If the parents are saying school's important, the children will take that into school. If the parents show an interest in heritage, in science, the children will get positive. If we do this in homes, why is it that the Pacific Rim does so well in international education and Finland? Because I can't think of places that are much more different. Well, actually what they've got in common is it's to do with the family, it's to do with the parents, the conversation, the drive, the importance of education and mind frame. So we need to engineer that as well as the curriculum, if we get this right, will be a mixture of the old heritage, the new, and families more widely. And even in the skills area, which I think is so important, we've got to build things up, try new skills programs, be more innovative about those. But one of the things that I'm trying to do now in the schools that I build in the region is to ensure that every child, by the end of the school, has run their first business. So we lend them the money, we ask them for a business plan, they run their first business while they're at school, so that when they leave school, if they can't find a job or they don't have the skills, they can start one and create jobs for other people. So this isn't about being locked in the past. This isn't about just wrestling with the present. It's trying to do really innovative things and do them, test them, and find even newer ways of doing. We get that balance right, we get the conversation between generations, then I think we have an incredibly powerful contribution from a sustainable education sector.
Thank you, Ralph, for sharing with us these prudent thoughts. And what's common among all of the thoughts that the three speakers have shared with us is that we can now safely say that education is good, important in and by itself, and education is also good and important for many other things in life. Okay, education means a lot for families, education means a lot for governments trying to create the welfare of their societies, and for the purposes of this session, education is very important for handling global issues. And we understand that there are institutional or there are educational institutions whom societies trust are capable of doing that, but the assessment is not showing that this is an easy job. Hassan?
Thank you. I very much like Ralph's spirit of challenge after I spoke. He said, you're asking the wrong questions. And I hope at some stage, we get into that debate. But I agreed so much with what some of the others said that I'd like instead to disagree with someone who's not here, or at least who hasn't spoken, but is not an individual, but so many people that I hear talking about education, maybe some of you in the audience, who say, oh, see, the thing is, because it's 21st century and we have Wikipedia and we have Google, so we have to stop teaching people knowledge, we have to teach them skills. Who thinks that? Why are we teaching knowledge? You don't need to know anything, you can just Google it. You just teach people skills. So, those people with their hands up, that's who I disagree with. So, this is a very, very common thing that people say. And I want to try to explain why it's like choosing between water and food, okay? They're both important. And here's how they interact in the same way that, your digestive system actually depends on you eating both water and food, and they interact as you take nutrition. The way that you develop skills is by using the knowledge that you have. That's the way that you develop skills. Now, it's true that if you have a pile of bricks and that's all you have, you don't have a house. But it's also true that if you don't have any bricks, you cannot build a house. And I think this is the fallacy of what a lot I read in especially the more mainstream media, including, there was this article about this in the Financial Times not long ago, thoughtful people. But I'm afraid it's not true. And just one little example. I was having a debate with somebody who I know, and she was trying to convince me that the differences between cultures is based on their genetics. Okay, so she was trying to convince me that, you know, the reason that she's like me from an Arab background, the reason we're like this is because of our genetics, and the reason European. Now, I probably don't have to convince you, that's a dangerous argument. Suddenly, it's a eugenics, it's a race-based, you know, and if you're, and she made furthermore the point that therefore, even if you're brought up in Sweden, if you're from an Arab background, you'll never be quite Swedish. I mean, this is it's important that we agree on these things, but ultimately the answer is based on knowledge and science. There is research that determines the genetic versus non-genetic components of how people behave. So I challenged her on the point of fact. So she came back to me the next day and she said, okay, I've learned all about it now. I watched a whole lot of videos on YouTube. This is a person who doesn't have the ability to go and get the right answer, because she started off with a whole lot of assumptions, which, based on those assumptions, your Googling will lead you to confirm what you believe. I probably do more Googling and Wikipedia research than almost anyone else I know, but I also am someone who has memorized a lot of facts over time. It's the people who know the most who do the most research. So the idea that we can send kids out in the world saying we've taught you some skills, you have no knowledge, but you'll just figure it out through Wikipedia, is a fallacy. We need to be building skills, but also learning a lot of facts is going to be a crucial part of education as well. So I'm disagreeing with someone who didn't speak because I agreed with you so much.
I think you're always a brave panelist, Hassan, who picks a fight with the audience.
Yeah.
I love it. I of course agree with you completely. Just to join in, but I think to be fair, that this problem so often with education is we end up in these camps. We end up, it's like, or in different time frames. And believe me, we know a lot about different time frames in England at the moment because of Brexit. We have one part of the population who are looking to go back to the past, one part looking forward, split the country. Actually, what you have to do in education is you have to deal with each generation, past, present, future. Now, I think what's happened is the people who are promoting 21st century skills, they are reacting against the shortages they identify in the current system. But the way to do that is to say and, not instead. And I think we're getting that. Now, the interesting thing is you say and I think you're right. It does need attention to how we develop research skills, how we develop those, what I call more than Google skills, the ability to search the right sources in Google, not the right, or to use the academic Google or different regional Googles. How do you develop these these skills of searching that are deeper? You've got to combine that in some way in what you're doing. Well, I don't think you do that just by adding more content to the curriculum. You know, you don't add a new subject. What you do is you try to find the right ways to weave it in. And what I'm actually starting to see now, which I think is a counter culture in this, is the use of micro-credentials. Now this is clever reform because it's saying that the big system of knowledge and what we know in the past and the skills we need for maths and science may be taught by these exams at 11 and 16. But actually some of these skills children are showing all the time, if we acknowledge them as with the credentials as they show them and they grow up through the school, they're getting rewarded. We have different cultures working together. I don't want everyone tested in 21st century skills at the age of 16 like everything else. So often education is about listening, finding out what's behind it, why it's an issue in that community, trying to get people to balance the pressures, and then find the different innovations which will allow them both to thrive together. That's a constant organic process with every country slightly different in the way you do it.
I can imagine that planners, designers of curriculum and academic programs are confronted with a whole lot of dichotomies to choose from. I mean, when they sit down to design an academic program, they will have to decide between choosing, is this program going to focus more on skills or content knowledge? Is it going to cater to global expectations of how an academic program should look like? Or is it going to focus on what our local domestic society requires? Is the classroom going to be a conventional physical place in which people sit and interact one-to-one, or is it going to be digital? Is it going to be student-centered teaching? Or, students take the lead in learning and deciding on what subjects they want to learn and to pursue that knowledge on their own efforts, or is it going to be teacher-centered? So these are many options from which designers will have to be careful when designing these. There should be a guidance to help educators, to help academic administrators to decide how to go about choosing between these dichotomies. Mathematicians or people in mathematics would agree that if we continue to take from a positive number indefinitely, it will eventually turn into a negative number. And I'm afraid that this is what we've been doing with the environment, for example. Over the years, over the decades, industrial societies, people around the world are taken from the environment resources that they require. And when we ask ourselves, what do we get or give back to the environment? Pollution, okay, global warming, and what have you. Same thing with educational institutions. If we continue to carry on with the same philosophy that, well, we teach disciplines, academic disciplines, and we will continue this because this has always been the received wisdom, I mean, and we become of straitjacket about it, not change,
Horrible.
That's not going to work.
No.
So the realization that we have exhausted many parts of the conventional educational systems, and it's high time that we update and renovate. The other realization is that we have taken so much from the environment, from resources, in order to shape our modern societies, and it is also high time that we pause for a while and ask ourselves how to go about sustainable development. This realization should be adopted by universities, by educational institutions, and there should be a unifying glue that will help people or academic planners and administrators to decide, is it appropriate to carry on with the disciplinary or introduce something else? The important thing to realize now is that almost all of the global challenges that we are talking about, poverty, climate change, lack of security, many of these challenges do not squarely fit into any single academic discipline. I mean, disciplines are expected to join forces in order to be better situated to address poverty, for example. Okay, economics, sociology, political science, for example, will have to focus. But if these departments are demarcated and each department cares about its only conventional discipline, we lose this chance of exploring the beauty of interdisciplinary studies. So that might be small advice to give for educational institutions when trying to gear their institutions towards addressing the global challenges in a sustainable fashion. Hassan, you want to?
Yeah, just to build on that, and I want to commend you, Professor, for the work that you've done in trying to, in your university, create linkages between the disciplines, as you were telling us earlier. And there's a bold new experiment in that in the UK. It's called the London Interdisciplinary School.
Yes.
Some close friends of mine are establishing it. We just celebrated the 1 year until launch, so it hasn't launched yet, but it's a new university in London, which we as the Gates Foundation will support in terms of curriculum, because what they're trying to do is exactly have I say kids, but young adults, university students, working on the thorny problems that we face as a world. And in addressing those problems, learning about the different aspects of them, from the scientific to the societal, the anthropological, the historical, and so on. So some of the problems will be ones that we put forward, things to do with absolute poverty, but other partners they have is the Metropolitan Police, who have plenty of thorny issues that they need to, so kids looking at crime, but through history of crime, science of crime, forensics, and all that, and other partners that they're bringing on who are working on real world problems that these kids could. So it's too early to say that this experiment has worked. It hasn't even started yet, but I think it's good that people are at least trying, and I know that's what you're doing in your university too.
Yeah, thank you, Hassan. Dima?
Yes, actually, I want to comment on Hassan's point. I think there is one university in Amsterdam that does this, which is really brilliant, the whole concept of teaching politics, for example, and economy, law, and the link, psychology, and the link between all of these disciplines and how each one of them is affecting the other. The one thing that I actually would like to add at the end is that, first of all, I think there is a lot of fear in this educational world, a lot of fear of change, and the fear actually is probably the first enemy of creativity, is the biggest enemy of coming up with new ideas, because it's actually dangerous. These are the children, the youth, the future, so it's dangerous, but at the same time, it shouldn't be the thing that will cripple this industry from being creative. Why the education is still the way it was, I don't know, 20, 30 years ago, why it's not really being creative, why it's not changing, while we look at other things and we see how, rapidly it is being innovated. So I think probably we need to look at this fear part and try to think out of the box, come up with, for example, what Hassan mentioned, new ideas, new solutions, what you are doing in your own university. And I think probably you have a lot of education that you need to start with the families, to convince them, for example, to look at these new degrees that probably they will not understand. For example, if my son studied law, politics, economy, and psychology, when he graduates or she graduates, what is the degree? So families and people will not understand. So a lot of education should go to the family, to the community, to be open-minded for new ideas and for new ways of education. And the whole system needs to look at the way that they are innovating curriculum, innovating new ideas, and focus again on a mix between skills and knowledge. Of course, it shouldn't be a competition. We need both.
Thank you, Dima. We don't want to leave the audience with the wrong impression that when we talk about education, we are only talking about teaching learning process. There is another significant component to this whole thing, which is research. Okay, so educational institutions are also responsible for research. So I would like to briefly hear from you about what are your expectations with regard to type of research, topic of research that might be conducive to the purposes of ensuring sustainable development.
Can I start on
please,
that?
yeah.
Can I pick up? I think it's a very good perspective to take on any education course, program, institution, is to ask what is the hierarchy of challenge? In each of the subjects you teach or the programs you teach, what's the challenge within that goes beyond the transmission of knowledge? What are the practical things you're getting people to work at? I then think, as you've just suggested, there should be a second level challenge in a school where people face challenges which are bigger, which need a combination of different subjects to solve them. We've been working with schools recently on, how would we plan an intervention to help a mudslide in Peru? How would we go about getting help to Haiti? How can we do a term's work on that? Using what we know about politics, economy, geography, etc. And I think those challenges across the curriculum kind of add. The third level, though, above that, is real life challenges. And the schools I really love, there's a school in Scotland which has the fire station for its community on its site. And it provides the fire service to its local community. Talk about challenge. Now, the lovely thing is you start getting up, it also provides Coast Guard station. So they've taken children into areas of challenge. And I think these are very good places actually to build the research in. You know, if I had control of the world schools, at the moment I'd want every world school planning to be a sustainable unit itself. So it has to work on, give that problem to the students, not to the staff, and get them to do the research that's required within the context of that real problem. And I think you get this lovely mix of students taking charge, people using their research schools, the challenges of the future, and then the discovery that actually the knowledge of the past is part of the solution. That's, for me, the sweet spot, that kind of length.
Thank you,
Not
Ralph.
research alone.
Yeah, thank you, Ralph. Dima, do you have any assessment of how, just briefly, how academic or educational institutions are responding to the challenges in terms of their research or the importance of research on their agenda? Just briefly.
I don't believe that we have advanced a lot if we're talking about the region, for example, and our focus actually is the Middle East or North Africa. We advanced a lot in terms of research, but I'd like to focus here a little bit and give credit to the UAE, to be honest, because a few days ago, I think there was a new report that was showing the skills index, and UAE was actually on top when it comes to, for example, data science and artificial intelligence. And this is something that, when we have our first artificial intelligence university in Abu Dhabi a few weeks ago, that is actually a huge achievement where other people in the region are still thinking about artificial intelligence and what is that and how can we actually link it to our education or open new departments, whereas here in the UAE we already have a university. We already are going along when it comes to doing the right research and utilizing the resources that we have in the country, the brilliant minds that we have into our educational system.
Okay. Thank you. Hassan, do you see any meriting values and also contributing to advancing, investing into promoting research into the subject of sustainable development as well as education?
So, I mean, I like Ralph's point about everyone being embedded in their community. I have 3 passports, which are Irish, British, and Iraqi, and I'm not competent to speak on behalf of America. But I have a strong opinion about research, and I think, and the Gates Foundation is one of the biggest funders of academic research in the world. And whilst every area should be funded, so we wouldn't say, if I say, oh, we should fund this, I'm not trying to say we should skew funding away from other things. But I think when your question was about sustainable development, and I think when it comes to sustainable development, a lot more money needs to go into at least 2 areas, and one of in terms of academic research, and one of them is in finding new diagnostics, vaccines, and treatments for communicable diseases. Because whilst the health of the world has improved a lot, malaria, tuberculosis, and HIV, 3 massive killers, are no longer declining in the number of people dying from them in the way that they have over the last 40 years, partly because the populations are growing fast in the areas that their disease is in, partly because there's drug resistance emerging in some places, and so on. So getting a malaria vaccine that works, this is a hugely expensive thing that we need to spend money on, and if we do it, then those kids who aren't dying or aren't being affected by malaria can go to school. The parents won't have as many kids because they know their kids will survive, and so the real problem of having a population that you can't look after. And so many things, the girl goes to school because she doesn't have 5 kids by the age of 20. So many things get improved if we can, through scientific research, find a vaccine for malaria, for example, and many other things. And the second area is agriculture, because the poorest people in the world are predominantly farmers. So when you talk about economic development, their economy is the economy of a farmer. And so research into agriculture in a world where climate change is causing droughts that is killing their crops, new diseases that's killing their crops, and floods that are killing their crops, how can we find new types of crops, of livestock that survive in a world of climate change? So these two areas of academic research I want to pull out as incredibly important for sustainable development.
Okay. Thank you. Certainly collaboration between efforts to address global challenges and also to improve educational systems, to gear these educational systems towards addressing global challenges. If success is possible and if future, inshallah, future years show us that that has been materialized, that will be great news and will look like more sauce on the pudding. So let's hope that this will happen. I should like to thank the panelists with us in this session, Ralph Tapper, Dima Najm, Hassan Damaluji. Thank you very much for these exciting and exquisite thoughts. I personally have benefited from these discussions. I'm going to walk out of this room as a better informed man. And on behalf of the audience, we thank you for these contributions. Thank you very much. Thank you.
شكرا. شكرا لكم. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this rich session dealing with education sustainability. Now we will take a lunch break for an hour and we come back for the third session of the day in Knowledge Opera at 2 o'clock sharp. Enjoy your lunch and kindly be back in an hour.